Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to a new member of our Patreon family, Vicky. Vicky, thank you so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming a member of Patreon, you help us cover the costs of producing new episodes week after week while remaining ad-free and relaxed for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. You, along with everyone who supports us in the month of November by becoming a member of Patreon or dropping us a one-time tip via buymeacoffee.com, will be entered into a raffle at the end of the month, the prize for which is an exclusive episode of Boring Books for Bedtime made just for you. And because it's just for you, copyright restrictions do not apply. So if you have a book you're dying to fall asleep to, this is your chance. You'll find links to Patreon and buymeacoffee.com in the show description, and I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight we're relaxing with more from a very informative work. Cassell's Book of Birds, from the text of Dr. Brehm, by Thomas Rymer Jones, FRS, Professor of Natural History and Comparative Anatomy in King's College London, Volume 1 of 4 volumes, with upwards of 400 engravings and a series of colored plates, published by Cassell, Peter and Galpin, London and New York. Let's pick up right where we left off with the fascinating history of a family of birds called crackers, or, in more common terms, the parrots. Let's begin. Parrots attain their full beauty of plumage and commence laying by the time they are 2 years old. Some of the smaller kinds breed within the first 12 months, but notwithstanding this, live for many years, and have been known to long survive the family in which they passed their youth. In countries where parrots abound, they are destroyed with unrelenting perseverance, and this simply for the protection of property. People must not imagine, says Audubon, that all the injuries they are guilty of meet with no reprisals. On the contrary, these birds are slaughtered in great numbers during their predatory visits to the farmers. Very frequently, they are sought for on account of their splendid plumage. There is nothing more natural, says the Prince von Wied, than this most simple and pleasing decoration, to the use of which savages are much addicted, and very beautiful are the articles made from feathers by entirely untaught tribes. Many of the aborigines of Brazil particularly excelled in this kind of work. The love for parrot feathers is very ancient. In long forgotten times, says Poppig, the inhabitants of the tropical forests brought arara feathers as tribute to the Incas for the decoration of their palaces, and early historians inform us that these feathers and the coca were the only produce which led to the peopling and cultivation of the formidably hot districts in which they abound. It is said that Alexander the Great brought tame parrots from India, and in later times these birds were taken in great numbers to Rome, where the favor in which they were held was carried to such excess that it was often reproved in the open forum. "O unhappy Rome," cried that severe censor Marcus Porcius Cato, Have we lived to see the day when our women nurse dogs upon their laps, and our men go about with parrots on their hands? The Romans kept them in cages made of silver, tortoiseshell, and ivory, and had tutors who particularly taught them to utter the word Caesar. In those days, the price of a parrot that could speak exceeded that of a slave. Ovid did not consider it beneath him to sing their praises, and Heliogabalus thought he could not set anything more delicate than parrots' heads before his guests. In Nero's reign, it would seem, only Indian species were known, but probably at a later period, African parrots were introduced. During the Crusades, these birds adorned the houses of the rich, and the first discoverers of America found tame parrots in the huts of the natives. Von Schomburg tells us that in their native lands, when tame, they are allowed to fly about without having their wings clipped. I saw many, he writes, which joined the flocks that were living over the village during the day and returned to their master's hut at night. In comparison with such a life as this, the parrots brought to Europe have a sad fate, but they suffer most before their destination is reached. The Indians inhabiting the primitive forests capture them in order to exchange them for European articles, and hand them over to some sailor in the nearest harbor, who knows nothing either of the necessary food or of the care they require. Not more than half the number that are shipped survive the long sea voyage, and many of those that reach Europe in safety perish in the dark, dirty, pestiferous shops of the dealers. It is only when the bird receives especial attention that its fate is ameliorated, but by that time it has often become distrustful, violent, and ill-behaved, and only loses these rude ways after long care and kind treatment. It is, however, very quick, soon learns to adapt itself to its altered position, and becomes accustomed to all kinds of diet. At first, hemp or canary seed is acceptable, but after a time the parrot grows more dainty, and if supplied with sweets, becomes such an epicure that any less delicate food is distasteful. It is easily habituated to almost anything that man enjoys, even to tea, coffee, wine, or beer, and will quite intoxicate itself with strong drink. These remarks do not apply to the little Australian ground parrot, which refuses everything except grass seeds and the leaves of plants. Most of the larger kinds enjoy hemp seed, hard-boiled rice, ants, maize, lettuce, cabbage, fruit, small kinds of millet, canary seed, and the leaves of plants. Such food as this keeps them well and thriving. Bitter almonds and parsley, according to Kuehl, are poisonous to these birds. Many degrees of intelligence are observable among the members of the parrot tribe, and the same species often contain individuals of very varied capabilities, but the memory of all is generally excellent. As regards teaching them to speak, the most important point to be attended to is that they should at first be kept closely confined and constantly instructed. Any extent of freedom may, however, be accorded when their education is nearly completed. On the contrary, should the owner desire the parrot to breed, a certain amount of liberty is needful. For this purpose, the first requisites are space, quiet, and a suitable tree for the nest. A tolerably roomy chamber in which they may live throughout the year, and the trunk of a hollow tree with convenient holes, the wood being of a soft kind, afford all that is necessary in these respects. The classification of parrots is particularly difficult, on account of the great number of species, and it is almost impossible to indicate distinct boundaries between the different families. It will, however, answer our present purpose to arrange them under the general titles of true parrots, Cetacinae, macaws, Araniae, lories, Lorinae, cockatoos, Cockatuinae, and ground parrots, Pezzoporinae, all of which differ from each other more or less in their habits and modes of life. The true parrots, Cetacinae. The true parrots are inhabitants of the woods, only leaving them to linger on their outskirts, and from thence to contemplate the tempting fields of fruit, upon which from time to time they make a raid. Many of them never quit their dense forests, whilst others of the smaller kinds prefer the less shady trees or open country. These birds belong to Africa and the neighboring islands, and also to various islands in the Pacific Ocean. They are likewise met with in great numbers in South America. The family is very rich in species. We shall, however, only select a few from the many, seeing that the mere description of their plumage would be wearisome, and we scarcely possess any information with regard to their mode of life in their native haunts. There can be no hesitation in placing the jaco, the gray or the red-tailed parrot, Psittacus erythacus, first upon this list, for it may be considered as the type of the race. It is true that it has neither the quickest flight nor the gayest plumage, but it combines in itself that equal excellence of all the attributes of a parrot, which gives and will retain for it a preeminence among its congeners. The jaco. The gray parrot exhibits only two colors in its plumage. The tail is of a deep cinnabar red, and all the other feathers are ash gray or grayish blue, bordered with a lighter shade. Near the head and neck, the light borders of the feathers are somewhat wider than elsewhere. The beak is black, the eyes light brown, the bare places round the latter of a whitish color. The male and female do not differ in hue, and but little in size, the male being the largest. Its average measurement is 12 inches in length and 25 inches across the wings. The tail 3 inches and a half. The wing from shoulder to tip 8 inches and a half. When folded, the wing extends some lines beyond the tail. Very little is known of these birds in their wild state, although they are brought to Europe in far greater numbers than any other species. We learn from Huglin that the habitat of the jaco extends from the western coast of Africa deep into the heart of that continent, and reliable naturalists have seen it in great numbers in Juan and Bongo up to 8 degrees north latitude. It does not appear to penetrate further east, and is quite unknown in eastern Sudan. How far north and south it is found is at present doubtful. It is worthy of remark that these birds were not many years ago imported from Guinea to Madagascar, where they became naturalized and increased so rapidly that at the commencement of the 18th century, their numbers rendered them a perfect scourge to the inhabitants of the island of Bourbon and the Mauritius. The gray parrot is one of the most highly prized of our domestic favorites, and well merits the esteem in which it is held. Its praises have been sung in all languages, and every work on natural history relates some anecdotes of its surprising cleverness. Perhaps the most celebrated of the species is one which lived for many years in Vienna and Salzburg, and luckily found an exact and industrious observer of its performances. The Count Corsi d'Ouattomont was the first who, in the year 1835, in Oken's Isis, gave us such particulars of its attainments as awakened astonishment in all quarters. This account has been attested by the late possessor of the parrot, President Clamarin, at the wish of Lenz, who afterwards published the following narrative. Jaco noticed and criticized everything that passed before him, gave the proper answer to a question, did as he was bidden, saluted people who entered the room, and made his adieu to those who were taking leave. He wished you good morning and good night at the proper times, and asked for food when he was hungry. He called all the members of the family by name, and preferred some of them to others. If he wanted me, his master, he called out, "Papa, come here." And whatever he said, sang, or whistled was done as a human being would do it. There were times when he seemed inspired, like an improvisatore. His voice then sounded like that of a speaker heard from a distance, when too far off to enable you to understand the words. Sometimes he would be marvelously polite. "Good morning, Reverend Sir. An almond, if you please, Reverend Sir. Do you want an almond? Should you like a nut? Shall I have some food soon? Have you got something?" Occasionally he would threaten, "Be off, you rascal. Are you going home or not? Be off, you thief, or wait till I come. You idiot, you clown." At times he was self-complacent. "Good little prattler. You are an excellent little parrot," etc. If anyone knocked at the door, he would call very loudly and distinctly, just like a man, come in, Herr B. What orders have you? I am your humble servant. I am delighted to have the honor, quite delighted to have the honor." Or he would tap on his cage and say the above to himself. He could imitate the cuckoo excellently. Occasionally his conversation was rather discursive. "Look out, come up, my dear little parrot. Bravo, bravissimo. Are we not going to dinner? Let us go to the window. Hieronymus, stand up, I am going. Long live the Emperor. Where have you been? Will you kindly excuse me, but I thought you were a bird." Whenever he bit or spoiled anything, he would say, "Don't bite. Be quiet, do. What have you been doing? Wait a minute, you rascal. What have you been doing? I am coming after you. How are you, you little chatterer? Have you got something to eat? I hope you will enjoy it. Hush, hush, good night. Pretty Paul may go out, so come shoot, Paul, shoot." And then he would shoot, calling loudly, "Puff. There, there, there. Go home, come march, go home directly. I'm coming after you." He would ring a bell that was placed in his house and say, "Who's that ringing? Who's that ringing?" "Why, here's a little dog, a pretty little dog." Then he would whistle to the dog and say, "Whistle, little dog," and ask, "What does the little dog say?" and then bark. If told to fire, he would say, "Puff," and give the word of command. "Halt, right about face, make ready, present, fire, bravo, bravo." He never said bravo in connection with his faults. Sometimes he would cry out, "What are you shaking me for? What are you doing to me?" and scream for help as though being shaken, and call out again, "Don't shake me, you rascal." Ah, that's the way of the world, alas, alas. Don't shake me, you rascal, and then laugh with great distinctness. If anything ailed him, he would exclaim mournfully, "Poor Paul is ill, poor little parrot." If annoyed, his tone became defiant. "Wait a minute, I'll come and punish you." If ever he saw the cloth being laid, or heard from a distance that preparations were making for a meal, he would immediately call out, "Let's go to dinner." When the family were at breakfast, he would ask, "Am I to have anything? I should like some chocolate." He would remain quiet as long as his master slept, but if in another room would begin singing and whistling at break of day. In order to see if it would be possible to teach Jaco to sing, we selected such words as he could say, and he was soon able to sing a verse of a song. He could put in harmonies and readily run up and down the scales, and learnt to whistle many scraps and shakes. He never kept to the same key, but would take the air half a tone higher or lower, and yet never utter a false note. Whilst at Vienna he was taught an air from Martha, and on being shown a dance, tried to imitate it by raising one foot after another and putting his body into dancing attitudes. Clamerne died in 1853, and Jaco fell ill, as it would seem, from pining after his beloved master. In 1854, he was so weak that he had to be laid in a little bed and carefully tended. He continued, however, to talk incessantly, and after saying, "Your poor little parrot is ill," he died. A young lady has given us the following particulars about another Jaco. The parrot of which I am about to speak was given me by a man who had lived for many years in the East Indies. The bird at first knew nothing but Dutch, but soon learnt German and French, and after a time spoke as clearly as a human being in all three languages. He was so observant that he often used phrases which had never been taught him, applying them on fitting occasions in the most astonishing manner. He said a number of disjointed Dutch words and sentences, intermixing German quite correctly when the phrase was not forthcoming in the former language. He could ask, answer, and request you to give him something and thank you for it, varying the use of the words according to the time, place, or person. The little parrot wants something to eat. If he did not get what he wanted, he would immediately scream out, "I must and will have something to eat," and if still kept waiting, would begin throwing everything about to vent his anger. He said bonjour in the morning and bonsoir in the evening, asked permission to retire, and took his leave of us. When he was carried out, he would say, "Bonsoir, bonsoir." This bird was particularly attached to his mistress, from whom he received his food, and would press his beak on her hand and say, "Kiss the lady's hand." He took great interest in all she did, and whilst she was busied with something would often ask with most comic earnestness, "What is the lady doing?" After her death he evinced great sorrow, and it was only with difficulty that he could be persuaded to take food, or that his life could be preserved. He whistled wonderfully well, particularly the tune "Ich dank der Schön durch deine Sonne," and sang most beautifully. He would say to himself, "Polly must sing a little and then begin. Perroquet mignon, dis-moi sans façon, qu'a-t-on fait dans ma maison pendant mon absence?" or ohne Liebe und ohne Wien können wir doch leben. Then he would sometimes say, ohne Liebe und ohne Maison können wir doch leben, or un coup sans façon. The latter version seemed to amuse him so much that he would burst into loud laughter. "Polly, what does Lottie say?" he would sometimes ask himself, and answer immediately, as though someone else had put the question. "Oh, my beautiful, beautiful little parrot, come and kiss me." And this he would utter with the exact tone of endearment used by Lottie. He expressed his conceit by saying, "Ah, how beautiful I am," at the same time stroking his beak with his foot, though he was by no means handsome, for he had the ugly trick of pulling out his feathers. On this account he was ordered wine baths, which were administered to him by the help of a watering can. These baths were most disagreeable to him, and as soon as he saw preparations being made, he would beg imploringly, "Please don't make me wet. Poor little parrot, please don't wet me." He could not bear strangers, and those who came to see him and wanted to hear him speak only attained their wishes by hiding themselves. In their presence he was as quiet as a mouse, but chattered incessantly when visitors were out of sight, as though he wanted to indemnify himself for the restraint he had been under. There were people, however, who managed to gain his affections, and he would talk with them when they came, and used even to crack his jokes about them. A fat major, with whom he was well acquainted, was trying one day to teach him a new trick. "Get upon the stick, parrot, get upon the stick," commanded the soldier. But Polly seemed sulky. All at once the bird burst into a loud laugh and said, "Get upon the stick, Major, get upon the stick." Another friend of his had not come to the house for some time. The visitor had been talked about, and it was expected that Roth, as he was called, would make his appearance on a certain day. "Here comes Roth," said the bird suddenly, as he saw him approaching through the window and recognized him from some distance. This poor parrot came to an unlucky end. It was given as a present to a relation of its master who had become superannuated and had taken a childish fancy to the bird. But it could not endure the parting from all it loved, and died in the course of a few days. We could tell of many gray parrots that have been brought to great perfection in the art of speaking, but the preceding anecdotes combine all that these birds have been known to do, so we will only observe that their wonderful memory and powers of mimicry have sometimes their disadvantages. Their first teachers are usually sailors, and it may therefore be easily imagined that their vocabulary is neither choice nor elegant. Unluckily, the best educated birds will often remember these old lessons and intermix the lowest and commonest words with their pretty phrases and speeches. The parrot can reproduce any peculiar sound with as much ease as it learns words, and will imitate the creaking of a neighboring door, the barking of a dog, the mewing of a cat, or even an old man's cough. Mr. Wood tells us that a friend of his had a parrot of this species, which proved herself a most tender and affectionate guardian. In a hedge of roses near its owner's house, a pair of finches had built their nest, and were regularly fed by the family, who were much attached to all kinds of pet animals. The numerous visitors to the rose hedge attracted Polly's attention, and seeing the food they gave strewed about, she determined to emulate their good example. Being allowed to fly about, she left her cage, imitated the cry of the old finches and gave the nestlings a part of her food, but these expressions of sympathy did not please the parent birds, who at once deserted their young from fear of the large stranger, so that Polly saw the little ones thus become orphans, and a fine field opened for her fostering care. From that hour she refused to return to her cage, and remained day and night near her adopted children, whom she fed with the greatest assiduity, and had the pleasure of rearing successfully. When the little ones were fledged, they used to perch upon the head and neck of their foster mother, who bore the burden with exemplary care. The parrot, however, received but small thanks, for her young charges had no sooner wings strong enough to bear them than they flew away. Poor Polly was for some time in bitter distress, but at length found consolation for her motherly feelings in the discovery of some deserted hedge sparrows. These she conveyed to her cage, where they were soon on the best terms with their adopted parent. Many American varieties of the short tails, usually called green parrots, chrysotis, differ from their African congeners the jacos in their prevailing green color, and in the small size of the bare parts around the eyes. Their body is compact, the beak strongly bent, the tail short, broad, and somewhat rounded, the wings broad and strongly formed, reaching nearly to the middle of the tail. The legs are strong, thick, and fleshy, the feet powerful and armed with strong claws. The plumage lies close and thick, the feathers being small and imbricated. Two species of this family are especially well known to us, the green and the Amazon. They are both large birds of 14 inches long and about 21 to 23 across the wings. The tail measures from 4 inches to 4 inches and 2/3, and the wing from the shoulder to the tip 7 inches. The Amazon parrot. The Amazon parrot, Chrysotis amazonicus, is of a brilliant green color, sky blue on the brow and top of the head, yellow on its cheeks and throat, and red on the shoulders. The side tail feathers are blood red beneath, the beak deep horn gray, the cere blackish, the feet ash gray powdered with white, and the iris externally bordered with orange and internally with pale yellow. The green parrot, Chrysotis aestivus, on the contrary, has its forehead and cheek stripes of a sky blue color. The shoulders are green, and the red side feathers of the tail edged with green. From the observations made by the Prince von Wied, Speke, Schomburg, and Burmeister, we learn that both kinds are widely spread over South America. The Amazon parrot avoids the forests near the coast, but frequents the woods and bushes of the higher lands, while the green parrot prefers the primitive forests. Both kinds are much alike in their habits and mode of life. Early in the morning they leave their roosting places and fly screaming through the air, beating violently with their wings until they reach the woods or plantations where they can find fruit. At noon they rest, after which they set out in search of food, and in the evening, except in breeding time, assemble in great numbers, making a terrible noise until a roosting place is found for the night. The Prince von Wied gives the following account of the green parrot, which is called the curiche by the Brazilians. In all the eastern coasts of Brazil that I traveled, this bird was very common. I found it in numbers wherever there were thick forests, and on the borders of mango swamps at the mouths of rivers. It breeds equally well in all such places, but seems to prefer localities where it can obtain the fruit of the mango. Great flocks inhabit the wooded country around Rio de Janeiro, Paraíba, Espírito Santo, and Belmonte, and their loud voices may be heard morning and evening in the bushes of the bog-like country, which is watered by the floods from the rivers. These bushes stand in the same relation to the Brazilian rivers as willows do to European streams, but the trees are higher, and the parrots can often make their homes on their strong stems or branches. In the breeding season, they usually fly up into the air in pairs, calling and screaming loudly, but except at that time are met with in very numerous flocks. We ourselves have seen such enormous swarms of short-tailed parrots in the Mucuri forests and other places that the whole woodland was filled with their extraordinary cry. On these occasions, many different species seemed to be combined in one flock. Their united screams were deafening, and as one party drove another from the trees, excitement gave new vigor to their shrieks. Should they alight upon a lofty, thickly foliaged tree, it is often very difficult to see them, as their green hue is a great protection, and their presence is only indicated by the fall of the shells and stones of the fruit they devour. Whilst eating they remain quiet, but if alarmed will utter loud cries. They are shot in great numbers as they are excellent food, and the soup made from their flesh is much esteemed both in Brazil and Suriname. These parrots lay 2 white eggs in holes of trees, upon a bed of shreds of wood, chipped out in preparing the nest. They breed but once in the year, and that in the springtime of their native land. The young, if taken from the nest, are soon tamed and learn to speak distinctly. On this account they are frequently found in the Brazilian houses, and are brought in great numbers into the towns and sold to sailors, who bring them to Europe. They do not learn to speak so readily as the gray parrot, but prove teachable, tolerably gentle, and amiable towards those that feed them. Under the generic name of Pionus, Wagner unites many small parrots, which we will call the blunt-tailed parrots. Their bodies are compact, the tail very short, the wings on the contrary being slender, pointed, and so long that they reach at least as far as the middle of the tail. The beak is compressed at the sides, and the upper mandible generally terminates in a long pointed hook. The legs are strong and powerful, the plumage usually harsh, and the feathers cordiform and particularly small. Those on the head and neck are thick and strikingly colored. We are familiar with many varieties of these birds, most of them from South America, and with others from Africa, which have lately been placed in a different tribe. The Maitaca. Of all the blunt-tailed parrots, none is brought to Europe in greater numbers than the Brazilian Maitaca, Pionus menstrus. This bird is of middle size, 10½ inches long and 20 inches across. The tail is 3 inches long, and the wings 6 inches in length from the shoulder to the tip. The plumage on the head, neck, throat, and upper part of the breast is ultramarine, through which the black ground color is visible. The neck feathers are of a copperish green edged with blue. The back, lower part of belly, breast, and wings are copper green, the feathers on the back being edged with a darker shade. Those upon the breast are shaded with light blue. The upper wing covers are of a yellowish olive green, the under covers the color of verdigris. The quill feathers are green bordered with black, the wing feathers blood red, yellow at the tip, and the shafts blue. The two middle tail feathers are green. The tip and outer web are blue, and near the root of a light blood red. The beak is horn gray at the tip and paler at the base, with a rose-colored spot on both sides beneath the nostrils. The legs are of a grayish slate color, the eye rings bluish gray, and the eyes grayish brown. The female resembles the male, but is somewhat paler. In the young, gray is generally the prevailing hue. In old birds, blue predominates. According to the testimony of travelers, particularly the Prince von Wied, Schomburg, and Burmeister, the Maitaka inhabits all the country near the coast in Brazil and Guiana, where these birds are met with in great numbers. They live in pairs in the dry season and assemble in large flocks during the rainy part of the year, flying with loud cries from tree to tree and settling upon those most heavily laden with fruit, to which they often do great damage, returning in the evening to their usual resting places. Their movements depend upon the time when the different fruits are ripe, and to enjoy these they fly about the country in various directions. During the rainy season, approaching nearer to the plantations on the coast and open country, but in the hotter part of the year, keeping more immediately in the neighborhood of the principal forests. The flocks of these birds are very noisy, but when pairing they only utter their call note, which is a shrill, harsh cry. They breed during the dry season, and their preparations for sitting do not differ from those of other parrots. The Maitaka is hunted zealously throughout the whole of Brazil, particularly in order to drive it from the plantations, and partly for the sake of its flesh. It is often tamed, and though not so teachable as other parrots, soon becomes accustomed to captivity, and can be taught to utter disjointed words. Great numbers are brought to the coast and eagerly purchased by sailors, for though very numerous in Europe, these birds always command a high price. The crested hawk parrot. One of the American parrots which we include in this family reminds us of the cockatoos, and must be considered as the type of a peculiar tribe, Doroptius. Linnaeus, who was acquainted with it, gave it two distinct names. The one on account of its sparrow-hawk-like plumage, Doroptius accipitrinus, the other because of its frill of elongated feathers, Doroptius coronatus. We will call it the crested hawk parrot, seeing that the long feathers on the nape of the neck, which can be raised at pleasure, distinguish it from other South American species. The beak is large, strongly but bluntly toothed, and having the ridge of the upper mandible powerfully hooked and projecting. The cere is short and its margin curved like the letter S. The eyes are surrounded by a broad, bare circle. The bluntly pointed wings reach to the middle of the tail, the latter being of tolerable length and formed of rounded feathers, of which the three exterior on both sides are shortly graduated. The legs are weak and the toes long. The plumage is on the whole extremely rich, of a pale yellowish gray upon the head. The exterior margin of the forehead is of a brown color. The crest is composed of dull blood-red feathers edged with sky blue. The plumage on the back is light green, somewhat darker in the middle than on the sides, and the feathers of the lower part of the body are, as far as they are visible, blood red. The sides of the cheeks and the throat are of a brownish tint, the primaries quite black, and the secondaries similarly colored on both sides. The tail is bluish on its upper surface and black underneath. Burmeister gives the length of this rare and beautiful species as being 14 inches, 5½ of which belong to the tail. The wing measures 7 inches from the shoulder to the tip. As far as we know at present, this bird prefers dwelling in the wooded district near Guyana and the river Amazon. Spix found it at Villanova on the river above mentioned. Schomburg mentions it but twice. He says that he met with it on the Rupununi and also in the huts of the Waro Indians. But though he saw numerous flocks of these magnificent birds enlivening the palm trees of Sawari and greeting passers-by with piercing cries, and thus had abundant opportunities for making observations, he tells us extremely little about them. When angry, he informs us, this bird is without doubt one of the most beautiful of the parrot race, as it then raises the brilliantly tinted feathers on the back of the neck until they stand up perpendicularly, thus forming a flowing circle round the head. The settlers call it hia, which word is supposed to resemble its cry. From the same writer we learn that this species inhabits the lower woods, approaching the settlements with confidence, and although easily tamed, is weakly and unteachable. It makes its nest in the holes of trees and lays from 2 to 4 eggs. And with that, I think we'll end this evening's reading from Cassell's Book of Birds. I love the way this volume mixes science, history, and story, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. If you'd like to read this work for yourself and see the many illustrations, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.